Good morning, everyone, and now we are back with our studies. And what we were discussing yesterday was the uh, security, the topic security. Security is concerned with when our core values are threatened, then there is a problem of security. And under this core values, what comes the sovereignty of the country, the territorial integrity of the country, and well-being of the people of the country. And regarding this security, actually there are two types of notion, two types of thoughts are existing. The first is traditional notion of security, and the second one is non-traditional notion of security. And under this traditional notion of security, there are two types of security concern, that is external and internal. External means when a country is under threat from the external powers, and this will take the form of attack or war. And in that situation, uh, what are the policy adopted by the country which is whose security is threatened. The policy which is adopted by such country is the first one was deterrence, the second one was defense, and the third one was balance of power. And we were discussing all these things, and one more policy a country can adopt in order to ensure its security, that was alliance building, alliance formation. And in this regard, we saw how our national interest is the guiding factor for alliance building. Alliances change because of there is change in the national interest. So we have discussed up to this, and now we will see that in traditional from traditional point of view of security, what is most important threat to the security of a country is the threat from outside its borders. The external threat is the most important threat which a country face, which can bring the security of the country in danger. So it is because in the international system, what we find that there is no central authority which can control all the states of the all the countries of the world. There is international organizations such as United Nations, but we cannot compare the United Nations with the government of a country. Just like in a country, what we find that the government is the ultimate has the ultimate authority which can punish any person for not following the law, and it has the power to enforce its laws. But if we see in the context of international politics, what we find that there is no such kind of world government exist. Though UNO is there, but UNO is just a creature of its members. The members has created the UN, so the UN can never be in the superior position than its members, because it is created by the members only, and it has authority only to that extent the members allow it to have authority over it. So it is not something like world government whose authorities everyone is bound to follow. So in this case, what happens that in the arena of world politics, each country is uh, itself responsible for its own security. No other organization or no other authority can ensure our security, can ensure the security of the country. If we compare it with the security of an individual, what we find that for our security, we are dependent on the on our government, on our administration, because it is the responsibility of the administration to maintain law and order in the society. But when we see all these things in the context of world politics, what we see that there is no such kind of assurity. There is no such kind of thing that every country is given security by any authority. Every country is responsible for its own security. It is responsible itself. No other country can ensure security of another country. So, in this world politics, security is the main concern of the country itself. Now we are coming to the another uh, part, that is internal security, traditional notion of security which deals with internal security. Internal security is as much important as external security, because if a country is not secure from inside, if there is violence or threat of violence inside the border of a country, then how can we secure the how can a country can be secure? So, what we understand that internal security is as much important as external security. But here, what we find that in traditional notion, internal security has not been given so much importance, and there is reason behind it. Why, under the traditional view of society of security, internal security has not been given significant place. The reason behind is that after the Second World War, whatever powerful countries were there at that time, for those countries, internal security was not at all a matter. They were completely assured of internal security. There was not any kind of violence or threat of violence from inside the country in those powerful countries, the powerful countries after the Second World War. So, because of that situation of the powerful countries, internal security was not given so much importance. And for example, we can see that when the America and the Soviet Union appeared as the superpowers after the Second World War, there was not any kind of problem of unrest or violence within their borders. And not only US and USSR, but most of the European countries were also free of such threats. There were not any group or communities which were living within the boundary of those countries which can threaten their security. So these powerful countries, they focused only on external security. So, and what was the cause of external security? Why external security? Why threat from outside powers became so important? Because the situation of that time was such that it was generating a lot of concern regarding the external security among the powerful countries of the world, because this was the time of Cold War, and this Cold War led to the various types of conflict, and the whole world was divided into two parts. One was the Soviet-led Communist Alliance, and another was America-led Western Alliance. And there was always a fear of military attack between these two groups. And besides this Cold War, there was another cause of concern. Uh, there was another cause to be concerned about the external forces, the external security, and that was after Second World War. So some European powers were still having colonies, and they were the European countries which have colonies. They were fearing that these colonized people can can be a threat to their security, because these colonized countries were struggling for independence. And in this context, what we see that in the 1950s, France involved in a war with Vietnam. Then British was also involved in war in Kenya in 1950s and 60s. So the colonies were also cause of threat to their security, and that threat was coming from outside the country, coming from external part of the country. And now, if we see from the viewpoint of the countries which became independent after the Second World War, the countries of Africa, South America, and Asia. These countries which became independent after Second World War, these countries are known as third world countries. You must know all these things. First world is the US led countries, the countries which are under the leadership of US and which adopted the capitalist economy. They were called first world. Second world is the communist countries which are under the leadership of USSR, and the third world countries are the countries which became independent after the Second World War. So these newly independent countries were also having threat from outside. External threat to their security was the major concern of these newly independent countries because of Cold War. What happened that many of the newly independent countries were became members of the Cold War alliances, and because of this membership of the alliance, they were worried that anytime this Cold War can convert into a hot war, and in this way they can come into conflict, come into the situation of war against their neighbors, because it may be that the neighbor have joined the other side in the Cold War, and they were also afraid, these newly independent countries who joined some or the other alliance, they were also afraid that the leader of the alliance can also maybe they can also be involved with the leader of the alliances, or against any of the other partner of the America and USSR. So in this way, the countries which became free after Second World War because of Cold War, they were also afraid. They were also of the view that the external factor was most important in the context of security. And if we go by data, what we find that it was because of Cold War that approximately one third of all wars in the post Cold War is connected to the Cold War. Whatever conflict, whatever war took place after the Second World War, all these wars, one third of all these wars are related to Cold War. So, and these most of these wars are fought in the third world countries because it was the Cold War was the war of influence. Both the countries wanted to increase the number of countries under their influence, and for that purpose, they used the newly independent third world countries of the world uh, to make them under their influence. And for that purpose, these third world countries were involved in war-like situation. So these newly independent countries were feared of this external factor, and then they were also afraid that after getting independent, still they can be attacked by their former colonial rulers. So they have to defend themselves against this kind of imperial war. So this kind of fear was there, and the world was experiencing so many wars because of Cold War. So external threat was very much important. Then what we see that the security challenges which were facing by the newly independent countries of Asia and Africa, those were different from the challenges in Europe. Whatever challenges the countries of Europe were facing, and whatever challenges the countries of these newly independent countries were facing, they were different. What is the difference? The difference is that the new countries face the prospect of military conflict with neighboring countries because uh, they were not having a good relationship with the neighbors. In Europe, what we find that the conflict with neighboring countries is not at all a matter of concern. It is not that is not at all a threat to their security because they are having a peaceful relation with their neighbors. But these newly independent countries were not having good relationship with their neighbors, and there was always fear of military conflict with neighboring countries. And there was also another important development which took place in these third world countries was the internal military conflict, because these countries were newly formed countries, and there were many groups inside the countries which were not satisfied with their status, which wanted that that particular community wanted some rights. Moreover, many times it happened that they wanted to be free also. In this, what we see that these newly independent countries witnessed civil war on the great extent. We have the data also. What we see that between 1946 and 1991, there was a 12-fold rise in the number of civil wars, and the civil wars took a new turn, and when when the neighboring countries start giving support to the to that group which is dissatisfied inside a country, which are uh, which have started a separatist movement, and in this way this way, what we find that the internal conflict is merged with the external threat, and this causes a lot of trouble for the countries. In our own country, we are facing this type of situation. In Kashmir, there is a separatist movement which is going on for so many years, and what our neighbor Pakistan is doing, that it is instigating this separatist movement, not only instigating but it is also giving all kind of support, emotional support, financial support. It is providing training to the separatist. So in this way, what we find that internal war and external war, both are combined, and in this way they are causing a lot of security threat for the country. So in this way we see that in these newly independent countries, internal security is also one of the major concern, though the powerful countries of the 1950s or after the Second World War, the countries which were very much powerful, for those countries, there was not at all a matter of internal security because there was complete peace inside the country. So, in the traditional notion of security, what we find that internal security has not been given that much importance. Now, we will see in this how traditional security, how from traditional viewpoint, a country can be secure. What are the ways to ensure the security of the country? So, the first thing is cooperation. In traditional security, there is a recognition that cooperation in limiting violence is possible. If we want to limit the extent of violence, then what is the need? The need is to cooperate. There must be cooperation between the among the countries, and this what we wanted to limit the violence. This violence can be limited on two aspects. The first is the end, the reason for which the war is fought, and the means of war. What are the weapons, or what are the methods adopted by the countries which are involved in the war? On these two aspect we can see that there should be cooperation among countries to limit the violence. For the first, we will see how uh, cooperation among countries limit the end of the war. Nowadays, it is a universally accepted view that countries should go for war only for the right reason. You cannot go for war in order to mm, grab the territory of another country, in order to have control over the resources of another country. Uh, these are done only by superpowers, and in the hegemonic world of US, this type of war can be done only by US. Uh, from other countries, we can expect that it can go for war only for self defense. If there is threat to the security of a nation, then only it can go for a war. Or many times it happens that in order to protect other people from genocide. For example, in any country, the government is adopting violence. The government is adopting the policy of genocide. It is killing a particular community and or caste. Uh, it is killing the people of a particular community or caste. Then In order to stop this kind of activity, a country can uh, start a war against that country. So these are the ends for what war can be fought in modern days, in today's world. And the next thing is that war must also be limited in terms of the means. The whatever weapons are being used, and what are methods are being used by the countries during the war, that should also be limited. Now it is universally accepted view that there should not be killing of civilians. There should not be killing of non-combatants who are not involved in fighting. They should not be killed, and there should not be killing of unarmed. The combatant who is not having an arm or who is surrendering, who is ready to surrender, then there should not be any kind of violence should be used by the army. Uh, Force must, in any case, be used only after all the alternatives have failed. So, the first of all, there should be effort to settle the matter by negotiation. If all the effort to sort out the matter fails, then only force can be used. Then only a country should go for war. And in that also, what we find that countries have cooperated for the disarmament, arms control. These are the things which are done by the countries through treaties, so that there should be uh, all the states, so that all states should give up certain kind of weapons. These weapons cause mass destruction. So, by treaties, the use of certain kinds of weapon has been prohibited, and this is only done through the cooperation of the country, and this is done regarding the means of war, the methods, the weapons, what are going to be used in a war, that should be limited by the effort of the by the cooperation of the countries. And in this, we can see that in 1972 there was a biological weapons convention, and in 1992 chemical weapons convention held, and these conventions banned the production and possession of biological weapons and chemical weapons respectively. So these kind of weapons neither a country can produce nor it can possess. And there are almost more than 155 countries who accepted this biological weapon convention, and 181 countries accepted chemical weapons convention. So these convention were also accepted. The terms of these conventions were also accepted by the big powers, the great powers. But here, what we find that nuclear weapons, which is a third type of weapon which can be used in a war, the superpowers, the US and Soviet Union, did not want to give up this nuclear weapon, which also causes mass destruction, and so many uh, loss of life can be done through this weapon, but this has not been given up. And this connection, arms control, for the purpose of arms control, anti-ballistic missile treaty was done by the United States and Soviet Union in the year 1972. In this, what we find that anti-ballistic missile is what? It is a surface to air missile which counter ballistic missiles, which counters ballistic missiles. These are used to ballistic missiles are those which are used to deliver nuclear weapon or chemical or biological weapons. So by adopting this anti-ballistic missile treaty in 1972, both the countries have agreed to uh, agreed to stop the extent of weapons. So, what we find that there is a effort from these superpowers to limit the weapons and to they were also conducting so many treaties for the purpose of arms control, which you studied in your chapter 1. For example, Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty 2, then START, Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty. All these treaties were done keeping in mind arms control. There should be limited arms. The country should not go for arms race, and for that purpose, these treaties are done. And in this direction, one more treaty was done, that was Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. It was done in 1968. It was an arm control treaty because it regulated the acquisition of nuclear weapons. Through this treaty, what was done that those countries which had tested and manufactured nuclear weapons before 1967 were allowed to keep their weapons. They were legitimately can keep the nuclear weapon because they have conducted and they have manufactured nuclear weapons before 1967. But those countries who were not tested and manufactured nuclear weapons before 1967, they did not have right to conduct any nuclear test afterwards. So, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty did not abolish nuclear weapons. What it does, it just limits the number of countries that could have them. According to this treaty, only 5 countries can have legally these nuclear weapons, and these 5 countries are the same countries which are the permanent members of UN Security Council. So it only limits the number of countries. After 1967, no country can conduct nuclear test and manufacture nuclear weapon. So in this way, these are the though it is highly undemocratic, this treaty cannot be appreciated. Still, we see from the viewpoint of war and its on the loss it causes. From that viewpoint, it is an nice effort in the direction of arms control. So, these are the efforts done by different countries in order to control the effect of the war. So, for today's class, this is enough, and now we will meet tomorrow.